Hello everyone, welcome back to Talking History. My name's Liz. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you're all keeping well. Today's video is Edward the Elder, so grab yourselves a drink, get comfortable as we travel back in time. Edward was born around June in 874. He was the eldest son born to Alfred the Great and Elswith. And Edward's the elder doesn't actually come from him being the eldest son and heir. It was actually a term given to him by historians to distinguish him from Edward the Martyr, who reigned from 974 to 978. Edward had two younger sisters, Elthryth and Ethelflad. And we don't know an awful lot about Edward's upbringing, his youth. From what we do know comes from Alfred the Great's biography by Asser. And Asser had written that both Edward and his youngest sister, Elthryth, were educated at Alfred's court, and they were both taught by male and female tutors, and they were taught to read Old English poetry and the Psalms, but they was also taught behaviours that would have been considered worthy at court. So they would have been taught gentleness and humility. And it's their upbringing that is actually really quite unique, because they're the only example of a Saxon prince and princess both receiving the same education. They wasn't separated. They wasn't given a separate education due to their gender. Alfred may have given Edward some responsibility as he was getting older, to prepare him for taking the throne. He may have made Edward King of Kent, is only a possibility, and Alfred may have also promoted men who supported Edward, and Edward probably would have gone on royal journeys with Alfred. What we do know is that Alfred gave Edward military commands, as in 983, Edward led an army against the Vikings at the Battle of Farnham. And it's also around 893 that Edward married Egwin. I think that's how you pronounce her name. And they would have two children, Ethelstan, who was the first king to go on to rule all England. They also had a daughter, and I'm not quite sure which daughter this was. Edward had 13 children in total, with 3 different wives, and I'm not quite sure. He had 8 daughters, but I'm not quite sure which daughter was Egwin's. I couldn't find that anywhere. If someone knows which daughter it was, could you please let me know in the comments down below? I'd love to find out. I just couldn't find it anywhere. So Egwin probably died around 899. There's virtually nothing known about her. And shortly after her death, he married for the second time to Ethelflad. I think that's how you pronounce her name. And she was a daughter of an earldom of Wiltshire. And also in 899, Edward lost his father Alfred on the 26th of October, and Edward succeeded the throne. But unfortunately, it wouldn't be a smooth succession, as shortly after taking the title of the King of Anglo-Saxons, Edward was threatened by he was threatened with a rebellion by his own cousin, Ethelwald. Ethelwald was the son of Ethelred, who was king, who died in battle. As I said in Alfred's video last week, he had 2 children, 2 sons, but both were too young to rule, and that's how it went to Alfred. So Ethelwald believed that he had a stronger claim to the throne than Edward. So he seized estates in Wimborne in Dorset, and Edward had raised an army. He marched nearby Bradbury Rings, and Ethelwald had basically threatened Edward that he would live or die at Wimborne. He would not be budged. But it was an empty threat, as he scampered back to Northumbria in the middle of the night. And it's here back in Northumbria that he was acclaimed king. So then in 901, Ethelwald sailed back to Wessex with an army. Edward also met Ethelwald with his own army, and for a year each side had lost and gained territory. Then in 902, at the Battle of the Holm, Ethelwald was killed whilst fighting Edward's army. So now Edward's only real threat to his throne had ended. Edward at this point had taken control of Wessex, East Anglia, and I'm going to say joint commandership with Mercia. Edward had always had a close relationship with his younger sister, Ethelfled. Ethelfled had married Bugred and Mercia, and after he died, she wasn't given the title queen. As I said in last week's video, they didn't like the title queen. So she was known as Lady of Mercia, and that was a damn good title. That girl had some power. And together, the brother and sister team, they attacked Viking raiders in 909, then again in 918, when they had pushed Vikings back across the Humber, and Ethelfled had taken control of York, which the Vikings was called Yorksvik. However, unfortunately, York would be lost once again to the Vikings in 919 when Ethelfled died. Ethelfled had a daughter called Alfwina, and this relationship didn't continue with uncle and niece like it did in brother and sister. So Edward took control of Mercia, and Edward had continued the policies that his sister had launched. She had started to build fortified market burhs across Mercia, much like her father had done before. So these burhs began at Rhuddlan, which I believe is in Wales. It's in Wales, I think. Thewel and Manchester. So Edward had organised the Eastern Danelaw into shires, but not all Mercians welcomed Edward, and he was forced to put down a revolt in Chester in 919. Edward had also founded a monastery beside Winchester Cathedral. which was dubbed the New Minster. The New Minster became the new resting place of his father Alfred the Great, and his mother would also be buried there. And Edward would also be buried at the New Minster, as was his son Alfred. I think I pronounced that name right. Edward had at this time married for the third time to Alfred. I think I pronounced, no, after Alfred, to Adgifu. I think I pronounced that right. I probably haven't. I probably completely butchered it. Between the three wives, Edward had 13 children, 5 sons. Here we go. Wish me luck. I'm going to try to pronounce all the children's names. I can't wait for the Tudors when everyone was named Henry and Thomas. It's going to be so much easier. So, the 5 sons was Ethelstan, Alfred. I think that's a spin on Alfred, I think. Edwin, Edmund, and Edred, I think. He had 8 daughters. And it's with the daughters' names that I am really going to struggle. I apologise if I butcher these names. They really didn't make it easy. So I'm going to look down at my notes so I can make sure I get them right. So we had Edbert. And I think is Edbert. Yes, Edbert entered a monastery, the Nunnaminster Abbey, which was founded by her grandmother Elswith. And Edbert died in 960, and she was canonised as a saint in 972. So unless it was Edbert who was Egwin's daughter, possible. I'm just thinking out loud here. Anyway, back to the names. So Edbert Elswith was named after her grandmother. Ethelhild, Edflad, Edhild, Edgith, Alfgifu, and Edigifu. I am so sorry that I butchered those. That was so hard to pronounce. What's wrong with Catherine and Mary? Why not name those? Anyway, back to it. So Edward had reigned for 25 years, and he's been largely ignored. And by modern, it wasn't until around the 1990s that he was finally starting to get a little bit of recognition by historians. And unfortunately, a lot of historians just think that he's been neglected by the fact that there's very few remaining sources of his reign. So in the late 12th century, Edward was starting to be seen as the destroyer of the Vikings, especially in southern England, and he laid foundations for a south-centred, united English kingdom. Edward is also considered inferior in learning to his father Alfred, but rather his equal or even his superior, especially in the military fight. He expanded his territory in the south and he ruled for a quarter of a century. He met the threat from the Danish and their leaders. They were brought down. Edward had also helped organise the political structure for England, and he centralised a royal system for taxation. Edward died on the 17th of July at Farndon near Chester in 924. And it's possibly that he died from the wounds that he had received whilst fighting the rebellion in Chester. Edward was 50 years old, and Edward's successor would have been Edward's eldest son by his second wife, Alfred. However, Alfred had died shortly after his father's death on the 17th of July, and his death remains a mystery, but there's several different versions of what happened. So one suggestion is that he was married with children, and another suggested that he was a recluse hiding in Bridgnorth in Shropshire. Alfred appeared to have been raised to take over after Edward by the men of Wessex. The Mercians had favoured his elder half-brother Ethelstan, who was brought up by the Mercian court in Gloucester, and Gloucester isn't very far from where I am. So, but whatever the case, Alfred conveniently died in mysterious circumstances at Oxford only 15 days after his father's death. There's always these different things that Ethelstan had him killed. I don't believe that for not at all. I don't believe that for nothing. No. He was partly responsible for his second brother's death, which I will go into detail in a second in another video. But I don't think Ethelstan had anything to do with Ethelred's death. So Ethelstan took the throne after, and he was the first Anglo-Saxon king to become the very first king of all England. And he's got a really, really fascinating story to tell. I apologize, this is going to be quite a short one. I wish I could give you more, but like I said, there's just not the sources around for Edward the Elder, and I think he's been neglected far too long. He needed his storytelling. So join me next time for another video. Look after yourselves. Please look after yourselves. I know it's been a tough one, and just remember it's okay to not be okay. Take time for yourself. Do something that you enjoy doing, whether it's reading about history, whether it's going for a walk, whether it's painting. Me, I have my own craft room. That's my haven. I go in there and I put on a history podcast, and I can spend hours in there, and it helps me. Do something for you once in a while. Look after yourself. I'll see you all next time.